What would you describe your job as? What is your job description?
I always find it quite difficult to describe my job, and when I was doing my website, I had to think about how to sort of describe it in one line on the top. And so I thought of the fact that quite often when I'm explaining to people about what I do, I say, well, I wear many hats, but they're all green. And so that's what I've done on my website, and I found lots of pictures of green hats and have them floating around in different places on my web. And I think that's quite appropriate because it isn't just, in a way, my job cross-cuts into a lot of different areas. I mean, I do a lot of writing, and I've written 9 books on environmental issues. But I consider that my main job is advising companies on what they should be doing. So like a management consultant, but from a green perspective.
How do you reach out to the consumer? What methods do you use to kind of get in touch with the people who are on the other side of the business?
Well, I think it's really fascinating actually, because one of the challenges that I find in working with companies is that you've got several different approaches that they might take. So some companies are looking at what they can do that's going to most appeal to the green consumer, and a lot of people now are green. And so they might choose to do something that isn't actually the best green option, but it's what people think is the best green option. And so in that context, I personally, obviously I don't like that, so I try to encourage them to actually look at what the best green practice is and apply those principles to what they're doing. And so I sort of divide them into that category, and then the companies that actually work out what is the best green option and try and not only do that, but communicate to consumers and get consumers to start understanding what that option is. And that's much more challenging. So quite a lot of the work that I've been doing is focused on that, and particularly in the last year around packaging and carrier bags, where there's a huge amount of sort of misperceptions amongst consumers in terms of what is good compared to what is that actually would be a good way for it to go. The new Green Consumer Guide was completely different to the original Green Consumer Guide, which came out in 1988, because for the original one, what we were really trying to do was educate consumers about the link between the products they buy and the things that they do every day, and the environment. And that was a connection that really hadn't been made at that time. And we had to search really quite hard to find examples of green products. Because there weren't any there. And so we were sort of indicating, for example, with batteries, that what would be great is to take out some of the toxic materials, and then some of the battery manufacturers actually went that route. But at that stage, that was the challenge. With the new Green Consumer Guide, I mean, the issues, huge, much greater awareness, links between what we're doing and how it affects the environment, but a huge confusion about the array of green choices that are out there. So almost everything. There is something that you can do, and people are confused as to what the best course to do. And in fact, one of the sections I most enjoyed writing, rather bizarrely, was the section on green death, which, you know, just hadn't even taken off at the time we wrote the original one. But, you know, looking at not just sort of, you know, what sort of coffin you should be using, but also whether you should be buried or cremated, or even freeze dried. And you know, it's really fascinating, some of the issues that come up, and it really did go into every sector.
And are you hoping that the new Green Consumer Guide is going to be picked up in the same way that the original was?
I think it's very different in terms of the market out there for the new Green Consumer Guide, because for the original we were the first and only book of its kind at the time we came out, and it sold in 20 countries overseas. It sold nearly 1 million copies worldwide. For the new book, in terms of you know, number of sales, much less in volume, because there are zillions of other books out there, but also because overseas they've got people who are writing green books, so they don't need to import one from the UK. Having said that, it has come out in Denmark. I think we might have a Spanish edition, but most exciting to me is I really want to get the guide, a Green Consumer Guide, out in China and India, and so that's something that I'm sort of aspiring to do, because I think the middle class is there, are sort of waking up to the fact that individual action could happen. And of course there aren't lots of competing books in those countries because it hasn't really come to them in that way.
I was having a look at your website, and you were saying that your current or recent clients include companies like Marks and Spencer, Morrison's, McDonald's, Shell. Procter and Gamble. I mean, do you ever feel conflicted when working with big business?
No, working with business is exactly what I have sort of set up to do, and I think it's really important. And one of the things that I realise is that there are companies that I won't work with, and there are companies that I won't work with on the basis of what they want me to do, but there are also a few companies that I just wouldn't work with, for example, the nuclear industry. But there aren't many, and one of the reasons is because I don't want people to think that by working with a company I'm necessarily endorsing what they do. Mm-hmm. And so if you start discriminating a whole lot of companies, the implication is that every company you work with you approve of what they're doing. Of course I don't, but at the same time, in terms of the advice that I give to companies, it's very important for them that I retain my independence. So they can't buy my services in terms of to say something that I don't agree with. I'm not like a sort of PR company which is just sort of being a mouthpiece for an organisation. If I'm saying something that is my point of view and it's what I believe, even if I'm doing it on behalf of a company, because otherwise it would invalidate the whole of my brand and would make it very much more difficult, one, to go on working, but also to have credibility for the audiences that matter to me.